Let's move on to the second part of the session, which is about how to communicate on migration. When you communicate on migration, what is really important is first to have a strategy. And what do I mean by that is that sometimes when you just like, particularly on such a polarized topic, as we saw, where there is a lot of like negative framing out there, just throwing information out there without knowing to whom or why you're doing this can actually come back to haunt you or kind of sort of backlash on you. The most important part is to think about like, okay, what is your strategy? And that means also like, okay, what is your objective? So if you want to communicate to legislators, policymakers, academics, or general public, you need to have different messages for them. This also goes back to our values. Different categories of people have different values. Start with your communication is to understand who your audience is and know your audience. A lot of really good communication strategy on migration comes as a result of studies on your audience. So like trying to know whom you're targeting and then learn. It's a bit like doing marketing research, trying to understand who is your, like, what do they like, what do they value. And this is the thing also about communication strategies. You need to have people who are communicators leading the communication strategy on this in your organizations, etc. Like I have very often learned that the majority of people don't, no matter how many times they show that this is information that's been peer reviewed and this and that, it just doesn't work because it's the most people respond to value-based communication. The second sort of key point is to choose credible messengers. And I think that's really important because particularly in sort of hard to reach groups, there is this like sexism and being like, oh, these are just like NGO people trying to make a bigger issue of something that isn't an issue, or like they just trying to promote their values. And, you know, so I think the messenger being the person who is experiencing the problem, but also the one who is coming up with a solution works really well. And another point that, I mean, maybe it's important to stress here is that most of the time you're targeting the middle, what we call the movable middle. There's no point in you trying to convince those who are in the extremes. You're not going to change. You're just going to invest a lot of your energy and you might burn out and you might actually amplify their messages by trying to do that. Those who think like you, who are universalists or who are like already like in social justice work, etc., like you're just talking in an echo chamber. Like you're just talking to yourself. You're preaching to the converted. Again, you're just wasting your time that could be best used talking at those who are in the middle, and using like real life stories always works with that movable middle and simple messaging and relatable messaging. Again, one thing to keep in mind is like, as you know, there is an increasingly distrust of like so-called experts. That's why you use personal stories. It breaks down that. In many countries, when there is polarization in debate, the NGO expert who comes in and tells us how we should do this or that, generally don't work anymore or have maybe never worked. That's what's important to like create partnerships in your communication strategies. So like have that people have the policy, the lawyer, all of that helping you inform your communication, but that your communication is led by a communicator. And also like clever partnerships always work. Like for example, you know, between doctors communicating on migration, you know, doctors as in medical doctors, because it has a high esteem in society, medical doctors. So when they talk about like the importance of like labor migration to meet up labor shortages in healthcare, it helps the message. The message goes across much better. The other thing is like, yeah, the value-based and emotive approach, where the idea is to trigger emotions, fix to certain values that a lot of people share. And I think the next part is to lead with hope-based solutions. So tells the problem But it quickly goes into finding solutions, but they are also hope-based solutions. And in general, communications that offer solutions are very well received. And one point here, like very important, is to move away from like this crisis communication and migration. Again, so the idea is like about being visual. Part of this is to use videos that can be shared around, etc. Different type of like messages and videos and images can be done for different people. And one thing that maybe it's important to refrain from is to try to avoid messages where migrants are portrayed as like either heroes or victims, because if you portray them as heroes all the time, you're going to set yourself to failure, because not everyone can be a hero. I mean, not every migrant is going to save babies from the fire and things like that. You know, and some people are, yeah, some migrants are on social welfare, and that's fine. And it's not what you want to communicate, but it's the reality. And again, the victims, it's also just get only sympathy from those people who are universalist, but you don't work on people who are traditionalists and conformists. Focus on the movable audience, because these are the ones that you have opportunity to impact, and you need to know like what their values of this movable audience are. Like, you know, what do they like? Do they like hard work? Then show how migrants contribute in terms of taxation and things like that. Are they more into like family? Then maybe talk about like how immigration policy is disrupting families that they cherish. Acknowledge the concerns of this group. Don't dismiss it. The worst thing that you can do, and we often happen is from like the left, certain left groups, is to dismiss people's concerns. The reality is that you know, you need to work with people's concerns about security, people's concern about their way of life being changing. You know, just by acknowledging what they are afraid or they're concerned about, you're able to open discussions and offer solutions to them. And the last point, that to recognize who are the actors that are reporting fairly on migration and support them. Subscribe to these media outlets that communicate more positively on migration, but also like if you work for an NGO or an institution like yours, support by also providing information, by creating collaboration, etc. Sometimes, like if you don't create these partnerships, your message is not amplified, and if you don't amplify your message, then you don't make change. And you know, some of the things like about working with the media is also about like being able to help them in terms of using the correct terminology, which is a huge problem in the media. Supporting fair reporting means both putting your money where your values are, but also if you're in a position to contribute to the reporting, do so by providing access to people, by also providing information and data.